Guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So have you been struggling to actually build a powerful, neat and insightful Power BI dashboard? Then this tutorial is for you. In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to build this insightful, beautiful Power BI dashboard in less than an hour. Now, we are not just going to be building a dashboard, we are going to be performing a thorough data cleaning in Power Query Editor, and we are also going to be performing a thorough data modeling where I will show you how to create relationships and link your tables. Now we are going to be explaining core concepts in Power BI. I'll be explaining concepts like referencing and duplicating of tables in Power BI. I'll be showing you how to actually create your dimensional tables, and I will also show you how to mark a date table, and I will also show you how to mark a location table in your Power BI. So if you're looking for a full hands-on Power BI tutorial, then this tutorial is for you. So if this is the first time you're seeing my video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like and share. Additionally, if you happen to actually build this Power BI dashboard, don't forget to give me a shout out on LinkedIn or Facebook, because I would really want to see what you came up with. So I'll be attaching the links to my LinkedIn and Facebook handles. So if you happen to actually build this particular project, please give me a shout out on LinkedIn. Let me see what you actually came up with. So enough of the talking, let's get started. So this is the Power BI dashboard we are going to be working on. Now I have actually created a file materials, okay, and a PDF material that actually shows the steps, okay, that will be following in this particular tutorial. I've actually created the materials and tools I use, and also I have written down the complex DAX functions I actually use in this particular project. And also for each DAX function, I have actually created an explanation, okay, to them. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I'll be attaching a link, okay, or I'll be attaching this PDF to the description of the tutorial. So you can actually go back to this PDF to understand everything about the complex DAX functions we are going to be working with. Okay. Now, one thing you need to understand about my Power BI is this. So recently, I actually lost access to my work email. Okay, so I'm unable to actually sign in to my Power BI dashboard. Now we are actually going to be working on this project, but I also want you to understand that there are some functionalities I actually use, okay, in my Power BI, in this Power BI dashboard, okay, or some visuals I actually use that I may not be able to use. Okay, like this particular visual, we are just going to be using the default visual in Power BI to achieve this. But however, the most important thing is that you are understanding the steps, you're understanding the process and how everything gets done. Now let's go ahead. Now, the first stage of this tutorial is this. Number one, we have to work on our data cleaning. Now, you understand when we talk about your data cleaning, if you have been following my tutorials, you would know that I have a lot of tutorials on data cleaning in my YouTube channel. So, in case you're confused about what data cleaning truly is or the steps of carrying out data cleaning, you can actually go back to my previous video, okay? However, in this particular tutorial, just like I have always done, I will try to make this tutorial as beginner friendly as possible. Now, for this data cleaning stage, this is where we are going to be cleaning our data to actually make sure that our data is neat and devoid of any mistakes, error, and duplicates and data type inconsistency and the rest of them. Now, after performing our data cleaning, the next thing we have to do is we are going to be performing our data modeling, where we'll be creating relationships between our data sets, okay, between the columns in our data sets. Now, after performing our data modeling, the next thing we will go to is our dashboard building, where we will have to build this amazing dashboard we are actually seeing here from the start to the finish, okay. Now, I actually made use of several materials. The first material I made use of is Canva. Okay, when you actually look at most of the icons I made use of here, you will see that I actually worked with premium icons, and this was because of I was actually using a premium Canva, so I was actually able to access premium icons. But at the moment, I actually deactivated my subscription to Canva because the clients I majorly use Canva for, our contracts actually ended. So I actually have no need of working with Canva for the meantime. But regardless, I'm going to be finding those icons because I already pre-downloaded these icons. And so I'm going to be finding these icons and I'll be putting them in a drive where we can simply go over and actually download them and use them for our Power BI dashboard building. Now, the next thing I actually made use of is kulos.com. Like, if you've been following my tutorial, I've always talked about kulos.com, where I told you that kulos.com is actually a website I use when I want to decide on the color code to actually use for my dashboard because kulos make it easy for me to come up with color combination to build my dashboards. Now, the next thing I made use of is Power BI, of course. So this is the interface of Power BI. So Power BI is also one of the major tools, of course, that I use for this particular project. Now, the next thing I used, of course, is YouTube. Okay, YouTube. This is, of course, where you will be seeing this tutorial and where you will be learning everything about this project. And please, in case you're not following me on my other social media platforms, please do wait to follow me on Facebook. On Facebook, once you go on Facebook, you type Tech Up. So you can actually see my Facebook handle there. I'm trying to actually stay consistent on Facebook the way I am being consistent on YouTube. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. Once you go to my YouTube description, you will see my LinkedIn link there. So you can also follow me on LinkedIn. Now, let's get started. The first thing we have to do, of course, is we have to go on our Power BI. Now, once we do is, please note that even if your Power BI dashboard interface is not looking like this, you don't have to worry as I'm using the updated that Power BI software. So in case your Power BI software is not giving you this interface, you don't just have to worry about that. Now, what I have to do is I just have to go over here and click on a blank dashboard. Now, this has actually opened a black Power BI dashboard over here. So I just have to go over here and close this. So now we actually have a clean Power BI interface. Okay. Now the first thing we have to do, of course, is we have to go ahead and import our data sets. Okay. Now to do that, we go over to save file, right? Then we go over to say get data. Now, when you go over to get data, you will actually see a lot of options where you can actually get your data from. Okay. Now, because we are actually working with a CSV file, what we have to do is we are going to just click on CSV. Now, the next thing we have to do is go over to where we actually have our data set to download our data sets. Now, the name of this data set is called financials. Now, all I have to do is click on this data set and I say open. Now, once I actually click on open, this data set actually opens up in a preview mode. Okay. Now, this is a preview mode. Okay. So the data set opens in a preview mode. Now, from here, you can actually see a sneak of our data. Okay. Now, from here, you can see that this is the delimiter is command, telling us that this is the command separated file. Now, you can actually see the feeds we have here. Feeds are also called columns. Okay. So you can actually see the feeds we have here, where we have our segment, where we have our country, our products, the discount bound, the units sold, manufacturing price, sell price, gross sales, discount, sales, cost of goods sold, profit dates, number, month name, and the rest of them. Now, as a data analyst, once you actually look at this particular data set, we can actually see some mistakes or some data cleaning processes that we actually have to carry out. Now, when you look at this discount column, you see that we have most of the rows that are filled with dollar dash. Okay. Now, when you also look at the other numerical columns, when I talk about numerical columns, I'm talking about our numbers, okay? Now, when you look at our other numerical columns, you will see that these columns actually have non-numerical characters. Now, when I talk about non-numerical characters, I'm talking about characters that are not numbers. Now, when you look at these numerical columns, you find out that we have non-numerical characters like dollar, we have non-numerical characters like comma, and the rest of them. Now, these are things we also need to handle. Now, during our data cleaning process, we are also going to be doing a thorough investigation to actually see what other issues or what other mistakes in our data we need to get fixed. Now, when you actually look below here, you can see that we have load and we have transform data. Like I mentioned, I'm trying to make this tutorial as beginner friendly as possible, the same way I have always done for my other tutorials. Now, when you look at this, and this is because I believe that I actually have new people discovering my channel every day. I have new people trying to learn from my tutorials every day. And these people might be newbies or people that are just trying to navigate their path into the data analysis or data science field. So I try to give them a soft landing, okay, whenever they are actually watching my tutorials. Now, when you look below this place, you see that here we have two you see that here we have three options. We have the cancel option. Cancel is simply if I want to eliminate the process. I feel like, okay, I don't want to work on those projects anymore. I don't want to work on this data anymore. I simply click on cancel and everything gets cancelled. Now, when you look at this load, this is where I can simply load my data directly to my Power BI. Okay, I can load my data directly to my Power BI. Now, this is transform data. Transform data is used when you actually have data cleaning to be done, or you have some adjustments that you want to actually make in your data before going ahead to load it into Power BI. Now, because of course we have a lot of data cleaning we need to do on this particular data, we simply have to go over and hit on the transform data. Now, this takes us to our Power Query Editor. Now, this is our Power Query Editor. When you look at the top here, you can actually see it that it is called a Power Query Editor. Now, you might be wondering what a Power Query Editor is. Now, Power Query Editor can be found in Power BI and can also be found in Excel, but this is Power Query in Power BI. Okay. Now, the Power Query in Excel and Power Query in Power BI are just the same thing, and they actually have the same function. And what is this function of the Power Query Editor? Now, the Power Query Editor is actually where you perform all your adjustments. Okay, any adjustments you want to perform on your data, is it is in the Power Query Editor you actually perform all the adjustments, you perform all your data cleaning before you actually load your data to Power BI to start working on your data modeling or dashboard building. So one amazing thing I love about the Power Query Editor is that the Power Query Editor is non-destructive. Now, when I say the Power Query Editor is non-destructive, what I mean is this. Whatever activity you actually carry out in your Power Query Editor, you can actually undo it. Now, let me say I actually look at this segment, okay, and I feel like, no, I don't really like this particular column in my data, and I want to eliminate this particular column. So I already clicked on the segment column. What I have to do is I right click and say, okay, I want to remove this particular column. Okay. Now, as you see that I have successfully removed the segment column. Now, if I feel like, oh no, I actually removed the wrong column, or I really needed that segment column to be here, or I felt like I removed the segment column by mistake, all I have to do is when you look over here, you see your applied steps. Okay, once you click on this, okay, you can see that the segment column actually pops back up. Now that is why I say that Power Query Editor is non-destructive. So whatever action you carry out can always be undone. Now, let's go ahead. Now, the first thing I want us to do is I want us to start doing our data cleaning, okay, which is the first step of this particular tutorial, okay. Now, after working on our data cleaning, the next step is working on our data modeling before we go ahead to work on our dashboard building, right? Now, what I want us to do is I want us to go ahead with our data cleaning. Now, when you look at this particular column, you see that we actually have five unique rows in this particular column. Okay, we have five unique rows in this particular column, and when you also look at this place, it gives you a lot of information on your column. Okay, from here now you can see that we have five unique rows. Okay, where we have the government, the mid markets, the channel partners, the enterprise, and the small business. Now, this validity tells us how many rows in your column are actually valid. This error tells you how many errors you have in your rows, and this empty tells us if you have missing values in your rows. Okay. Now, the first thing I want us to do is I want us to go ahead and look at this. Okay. Now, when you actually look at this segment, you will see this ABC here. Now, this tells you the data type of your column. Now, when you actually click on this ABC, you can actually see the various data types we actually have in Power BI. Now, of course, ABC is a text data type. Okay, it's a text data type. Okay, meaning these are just words. Okay. Now, when you look at this, you find out that okay, this particular column is indeed appropriate data type. Okay. Now, why Power BI was actually able to detect the data type of my columns is actually because I actually turned on a feature in Power BI that actually allows Power BI to automatically dictate the columns or the data type of my columns. Okay. Now, when you also look at this country, you also find out that okay, this is actually a text column, so we have nothing to do with that. The same thing with the product column, and the same thing with the discount band column. Now let's go to the unit sold. Now, when you look at the unit sold, it is showing you that ABC, it is showing us ABC. Now, but when you actually look at those particular column, you see that it is a numerical column. Now, Power BI is actually treating this column as a text column because it actually has a lot of non-numerical characters attached to it. Okay. Now, when you see this dollar sign and all, they are all non-numerical characters. So that is why Power BI is actually depicting it as a text column instead of a numerical column. Now, to actually eliminate the non-numerical characters, the first thing we have to do is we go over to right click on this. So once we right click on this, we go over to say replace values. So once we click on replace values, we go over to say the value we are looking at replacing is the dollar sign and we are replacing it with nothing. Then we say OK. Now the next thing we have to do is go over to replace value. And what are we trying to replace? We are okay, so I think we clicked on replace errors. Oh no. So we go over to replace values. So what are we trying to replace? We are trying to replace the comma with nothing. Okay, so we say replace comma and we leave here blank because we want to replace with nothing. Then we say okay. Now, this eliminates all our non-numerical characters. Okay, so when you look at this, you find out that these, our non-numerical characters has successfully been eliminated, right? Now, the next thing we can do is we can go ahead to change the data type for this particular column. Okay, so to do that, we just go over here to click on this and we say changing it to decimal because, of course, this is actually a decimal column. Okay. Now, when we look at this, you'll find out that okay, this has successfully been changed, okay, to a decimal data type. Now, the next thing we have to do is, of course, we have to move over to the next, which is our manufacturing. Okay. So for our manufacturing, you see that all we have to change is the dollar. Okay. So the dollar sign is the only non-numerical character we have. Okay. So to do that, we just have to right click and we say replace values. So we insert our dollar sign and we say we are replacing with nothing. Then we say okay. Now we can go over to click on this and say let's make this okay, let's check this. So as you can see, mostly is 0000000. So we can cancel this and let's change this to whole number. Okay. Now let's move ahead. Now, when you look at this sales price, you can also see that we actually have non-numerical character, which is the dollar sign. So we can simply go ahead to, instead of changing all this one after the other, we can simply go ahead to right click on these two columns, then we'll say let's replace values, and we are replacing the dollar sign with nothing. Okay, then holding this, we can also say replace values, we are replacing comma with nothing. Comma, we are replacing it with nothing. Okay, then we can simply go over to right click, and we can simply say, okay, before that, let's investigate this. Okay, so we can simply say this should be a whole number. Okay, then we can simply say this should be replaced and switched to a decimal number, right? Now, the next thing we have to do is let's go over to our discount column. Okay, so when you look at our discount column, you see that we actually have some. Let's first of all unselect, and let's just select this, and let's say okay. Now you can see that we actually have a lot of rows with just the dollar sign, right? Now let's go back to this, and let's simply say, okay, I want to see all. Okay. Now there are two ways we can actually handle this particular rules with the dollar sign. Number one way is to simply go ahead and change the values just the way we have done for the rest of the columns. Then we change the value to nothing. Okay, we replace the value to nothing. Another way is to use the filter. Okay, so we can simply come here and filter out those rules. Okay, then we say okay, right? So once, okay, so I have to undo that. All right. So let's go over to this again. And let's say we just want to filter out this particular rules. So we can say, okay, now, once we filter out those particular rows, you can see that, okay, now our columns or the rows with just the dollar dash has been eliminated, right? Then we can go ahead to right click and say, what do I want to do? I want to replace the values dollar with nothing. So I simply say replace the value dollar with nothing, okay? Then I can simply click here and say, okay, I can simply say I also want to replace the comma with nothing. Okay, I can replace comma with nothing. Then I can simply go here, click and change this to decimal, right? Now that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. Now, when you actually look at this, okay, when you look at this, that is the same thing we have to do. Okay, so we have to eliminate non-numerical characters. Okay, we have to eliminate non-numerical characters, right? Now let's go ahead to cancel this, right? Let's go ahead to right click and click on the cost of goods sold. Now let's right click and let's say replace dollar with nothing. Then we can say okay. Then let's go over to say replace values. Let's say we want to replace comma with nothing. Then we can also say okay, right? Now the next thing we can actually do is also right click and say let's change type to decimal, right? Now that worked. Now let's move ahead. Now let's analyze the profits. Now let's check the profits. Now when you look at the profits, you find out that we actually have more complex non-numerical characters to handle. As you can see, we have the dollar, we have the opening and the closing brackets. Now when you also look at this, we have columns with dollar dash, right? Now we have columns with dollar dash. Then, before we go ahead, the first thing I want us to do is I want us to simply uncheck the columns with dollar dash, right? So once we uncheck the column with dollar dash, now that eliminates them, right? Now I want us to scroll down to see if there are anything we actually have to handle. Okay. Now it seems like what we only have to handle is the dollar and the comma, right? And the open and the closing bracket. Now, one thing you need to understand that mathematically, the opening bracket represents a negative sign, right? The opening bracket represents a negative sign mathematically. Now, to handle this, what we have to do is we simply go over to say replace values, okay? So once we replace values, because we are trying to keep the negative sign, remember I said the opening bracket is a negative sign. Now, because we are trying to keep the negative sign, because if we go ahead and change the dollar sign and the opening brackets, okay, without actually handling it as a negative value, it is going to turn all the negative values to positive values. Okay. And remember, in this column, we are dealing with profits, right? Now, what we have to do is we have to say dollar opening. Okay. Now we handle it with, we replace it with negative sign. Okay. Then we can say okay, right? Now, the next thing we have to do is we can simply go over to say replace, and we can say replace closing brackets with nothing, right? Now, the next thing we have to do is we can go ahead to replace our dollar, okay, with nothing, right? Then we can then go ahead to replace our comma with, sorry, our comma with nothing. Okay. Now let's analyze this. Okay. Now you can see that we have been able to actually retain the rows with negative values, right? We have been able to retain the rows with negative values. So we did not end up changing all negative values to positive values. So which was actually what we are trying to achieve, right? Now I also want us to go ahead to look at this. Okay. Now there was something I did not really catch here. Now, when you actually look at this, now you can see that we have columns with just negative signs. Okay. So what I have to do, I simply uncheck this and say okay, right? So the next thing we can do is I want us to replace the comma. Okay. So we go ahead to say replace comma with nothing, then we say okay, right? Now we can simply go ahead and change to decimal. Now you see that when we go ahead to change this, we are actually having errors. Okay. Now this error is telling us that we actually have numbers that are less than one. Okay. Now so let's go ahead and handle this. Now the first thing I want us to do is let's go ahead and remove this, undo that step. Now let's go ahead and cross check. Now, when you look at this properly, you find out that we have columns with just negative values. Okay, with just negative sign. Okay. Now, what we have to do is we can simply uncheck that and say okay. Now, once we uncheck that, let's try changing to decimal again. And okay, that works, right? Now, the next thing we have to do is let's go over to our dates. Okay. Now, when you look at our date is correct. Okay. So there's nothing to handle there. And when you look at our month name, our year, this is actually looking okay. But there's something I want us to do. Okay, because when we get to our data modeling phase, we are going to be creating a proper date table, okay? And we are going to be working with this dates column alone. So I want us to just click on this, okay, and eliminate these columns. I'm going to remove those columns because I'm going to be using a DAX function to create a proper dates column, okay? Now, the next thing I want us to do is handling our duplicated values. Now, when you look at this, you see that we have our duplicated values. Okay, when you see our government, we see our government, so the values are duplicated. Now, remember when you're handling duplicate values, you're handling duplicate values for just your categorical columns, right? So all I have to do is I click on all my categorical columns, okay? Then I right click and say eliminate duplicates. Okay. So once I right click and say remove duplicate, you see that all duplicated values have successfully been handled. Now, the next thing I want us to do is I want us to go over to our unit sold. Okay. Now, I want to say I want to see them in a descending order. Now, I think this makes sense, right? Now, this way I can actually see the states, okay, with the highest unit sold, okay, the segment with the highest unit sold, okay. And for this, I can simply say I want to arrange them by descending. So now we can actually see the segment with the highest unit sold, the country with the highest unit sold, the product with the highest unit sold, and the rest of them. Now, this is what we call sorting. Okay, sorting, maybe sorting in a descending or ascending order. Okay. Now we have successfully done our data cleaning. Okay. If we actually discover any other thing along the way, we can always come back to it. But for now, we have done our data cleaning. Now, according to our tutorial material, the next phase we are going to be working on is our data modeling. Now, we have actually come to our data modeling phase. Now, in our data modeling, before we actually go into the data modeling in Power BI, where we have to start creating our relationships, we actually need to have our dim tables, also known as our dimensional tables. Now, there are two ways of creating our dimensional tables. You can actually create the dimensional tables using DAX functions, or you can create the dimensional tables in Power Query Editor. Now, in most of my tutorials where I talk about data modeling, I've always created my data, I've always created my dimensional tables using DAX functions, okay? But in this particular tutorial, I'm going to be creating my data modeling, or sorry, I'm going to be creating my dimensional tables in Power Query Editor. Now, before we go ahead, there are two terms I need to explain. Now, we'll have what we call duplicate and referencing. Now, most newbies actually mistake both of them to be the same thing, but they are actually two different things. Now, when you're creating a duplicate of a table, now we have a table we call the financials, right? Now, a table is simply a structured data with columns and rows. Now, when you're talking about duplicating a table, you're simply creating a copy of that table. Okay. Now, whatever you actually do to a duplicated table does not affect its source, which is the table where the duplicate was actually created from. Now, when you're duplicating a table, you're just creating an exact replica of that table, an exact independent replica of that table. Now, why did I say an exact independent replica? Now, because the duplicated table you're creating is independent in the sense that whatever you do in the duplicate table or whatever you do in the source table do not affect do not affect or do not reflect in the duplicated table. So it's just like you're just creating a lookalike of a table and they are not linked together. But when you're referencing a table, it's just like you're linking a new table to the old table, which is the direct source. So whatever you actually do in the source of that particular reference table reflects in the reference table. Let me take that again. When you are when you're referencing a table, you're linking it to its source. You're not creating an independent replica, but you're creating a dependent replica of that table. Now, what do I mean by a dependent replica? It simply means that whatever changes you actually make to the source of that reference table will reflect in the reference table itself. Now, these are the two major differences between referencing and duplicating in Power BI. Now, for creating our dimensional table, we are going to be referencing the financials. Now, remember that when we are working with modeling, we are going to be working with our star schema, where we have one fact table and various dimensional tables. Now, in this situation, the financials is going to be our fact table, while we will have various dimensional tables. Now, when we are talking about dimensional tables, you need to understand that dimensional tables are our non-numerical tables. For short, dimensional tables are our categorical tables because they actually give explanation to the numerical tables. So now when you look at this, you see that we will have four different dimensional tables. So we are going to have the dim segment, the dim country, the dim products, the dim discount bound. And we are also going to be having our dim date table. So in total, we'll be having five dimensional tables. Now, the first thing we have to do is work on our dim segment table. Okay. Now, to do that, the first thing is we right click on this and say reference. Okay. Now, once we click on reference, this will actually create a new table. Okay, now we can simply double click on this and let's call this segment segment. Okay, so once we click on the segment, we can rename it. So now we have successfully renamed it to the segments. Okay, now what we are going to do is we are going to be eliminating every other rules, right? Now what do we have to do? We simply right click and say remove other columns. Okay, so we have eliminated other columns. Right, now we also have to go back to our financials, then let's right click and let's say reference. Now we can simply rename this and say dim country. Okay, also we right click on country and say remove other columns. Okay, now we can also go back to financials and let's say duplicate. Okay, let's duplicate. Sorry, let's reference. Okay. Now we can also double click on this and let's call this team underscore products. Okay. Team underscore products. Then we come over here, we right click on product and say remove other columns. Now let's go over to also say reference. Okay, now we double click on this and let's call this the discount band. Okay, the discount underscore band. Okay, let's just say discount band, right? Then we also right click on discount band and say remove other columns. Now the next thing we have to do is we also go over here and we right click and we say reference, right? Then let's double click and call this theme underscore date, right? Now let's scroll down to our date and say remove other columns. So we right click and say remove other column. Now we only have our dates right here. Now when you look at this, you see that we have successfully created our dimensional tables. Okay. Now in case along the line we notice any issues, we can always come back to this our Power Query editor and handle that. Now for now, I think we are done with this. Now what we have to do is let's go over to say close and apply. Now this automatically loads our cleaned data into our Power BI. So we have successfully performed our data cleaning and also created our dimensional tables. So when you actually look here, you can see that we have the various dimensional tables we have created. Then when you look right here, you see that we have our main data source, okay? And this is what we call the facts table, okay? Now remember that I mentioned that when we are performing our modeling, we are going to be making use of the star schema. Now, when we are talking about star schema, we are talking about the schema where we have one fact table, okay, at the middle or at the center. Then we have various dimensional tables scattered all over it. So we are going to be seeing how that works or what it looks like when we are performing our data modeling. Now, remember that when we were actually creating our dimensional tables, I told you that we were going to create a date table, an actual date table. Now, you remember that I deleted some columns that were actually dates related. So I said that we are going to be creating an actual date table. Okay. Now, and I mentioned that we are going to be creating that actual date table using our DAX functions. Now, don't forget that over here, I told you that I've actually written down all the complex DAX functions I actually use when building this tutorial. Okay. Now, when you look at here, the first complex DAX function I actually wrote down is our date table. Remember, I mentioned that we are going to be creating a proper date table using our DAX functions. Okay. Now, for each DAX function, I actually wrote an explanation. Okay, that actually tells you what the particular DAX function is actually doing. Now, as you can see here, we also have our sales status. Okay, Then I created an explanation for that. Then we have our sales indicator, and I also created an explanation for that. Our sales indicator color, I also created an explanation for that, and our sales growth percentage, which I also created an explanation for. Okay. So like I mentioned, I'll be leaving this particular PDF file to the description of this tutorial. So you can always revert to it, or you can always walk along with it. All right. Now let's go back. Now, remember, I mentioned that I lost access to my work email, all right? So I actually had to take my time to go through my gallery to actually look for those icons. That means the icon I used for this particular tutorial, okay? And I also uploaded everything to our dashboard, okay? So it will actually be easier to navigate, and we can actually make this tutorial as fast as possible. Now let's move ahead. So because I want this tutorial to be as fast as possible, I've actually went ahead to created the measures, okay, all the measures we are going to be visualizing in this tutorial. And as you can see, I've actually created the sales status, the sales growth, and everything we'll be making use of, okay? But you don't have to worry, okay? All you just have to do, like I mentioned, is actually work with this particular PDF, as I have everything already written down here, okay? So every KPI we are going to be working with, and everything you need has already been written down here. All complex KPIs has already been written down here. Now the only KPIs that I did not actually put down here are just simple KPIs like our total sales and our total profit and average discount, okay? So the other KPIs has actually been taken down here, okay? So you can always go through this and actually work with it. Now let's move ahead. Now, the next thing we have to go to is, of course, we have to go to our data modeling. But before we go to our data modeling, of course, we need to create an actual date table. To do that, what we have to do is we have to go over to our new table. Now, once we go over to our new table, what we have to do is we copy the DAX functions for date table and just paste it here, right? And we say, okay, now we can close this. So now when you look here, we have actually created an actual date table, okay? As you can see, it has the date, it has the day name, day of the week, month name, month number, and the rest of them, all right? Now, for Power BI to actually recognize that this is a date table, we just have to go over here and say mark as date table, okay? So we say dates, then as you can see, it has been validated successfully. Then we can say okay. You can say okay. Now you see that Power BI now recognizes this as our date table, right? Now the next thing we have to do is we have to go over to our data modeling. Now to go over to our data modeling, we click here, okay? Now this is the model now. Now you can actually see all our dimensional tables, okay? And you can see here, this is our facts table. But when you look over here, you see that we have our dates table here. So we just have to drag it closer to this, right? So we can drag it closer to this, and let's just move it right here, right? Now we can actually go ahead to start performing our data modeling, okay? We can go ahead to start creating the relationship between our facts table and our dimensional tables, right? Now, when you go over here, you see that this we have our country, okay? And the country, our dim country is our location, right? Now, there's something I want us to do. I want us to ensure that Power BI recognizes this location as a location table. Now, what we have to do is as a country, right? So let's go over to advanced again. Then let's say sort column by country. Okay. Now, yeah, this is what I was looking for. So I was looking for the data category. So we can say country slash region. All right. Now Power BI recognizes it as a country. As you can see, there's this map icon over here. So it tells us that Power BI now recognizes this as a country. Now let's go over to click on dates, and let's go over to advanced. Okay. Now let's say, okay, I think this is not necessary because we have already done that, right? Now what we have to do is go over to start creating our relationship. Okay. Now let's go over here. Let's look for, we can decide to make this facts table a bit bigger, right? So we can decide to make it a bit bigger. Then let's go over to segments. Okay, let's look for our segment, right? A segment. So this is our segment right here. So we can simply drag this to this. Okay, drag this to this. So we have successfully created a relationship for the segment. So for the dates, we can, okay, let's say for the dates we can simply drag this to here, right? So we have successfully created that relationship. So for the products, we can simply still drag this to products. Okay. So for the country, of course, we can drag the country to here, right? Okay. Now for the discount band, so let's look for the discount band. So we can drag this to here, right? Now, as you can see, we have successfully created our relationships between our dimensional tables and our fact table. Okay. Now, when you look at this is what we call a star schema. Why? Because as you can see, the fact table is actually at the center. Then we have our dimensional tables hovering around it. Okay. Now, one thing you need to understand about the star schema is that we can only have one fact table, but we can actually have various dimensional tables. Okay, as you can see, this is our fact table, while these are our dimensional tables. So now, according to our tutorial, we have actually completed our data cleaning and our data modeling. Now we can go over to our dashboard building. The next thing we have to do is we actually have to go over to start building our dashboard. Okay, so we have to go over to start building this beautiful dashboard you can actually see here. Not just beautiful, but very insightful dashboard. Now, to do that, of course, like I mentioned, that I already have my icons and everything I use for building that dashboard over here, right? To actually make this tutorial a bit faster. Now, the first thing we have to do, of course, is I want us to actually achieve the structure of the dashboard, okay? Before we go ahead to start achieving any write-ups or doing our calculations, okay? Now, the first thing we have to do, of course, I want us to achieve this part of the dashboard. Now, to do that, let's just go over to our dashboard. So the first thing we have to do, of course, we go over to say we want to insert. And what are we trying to insert? We are trying to insert a new shape, okay? Then we can simply make this a bit smaller, right? We can simply make this a bit smaller, then make this a bit wider, right? So we should be working with this to make sure that we are achieving the right thing, right? So we can make this a bit bigger. Now, the next thing we have to do is we can go over to style, and I want us to turn this to white. Okay. Now, the next thing we can also do is I want us to turn off border. Okay. Now, the next thing we can do is I want us to drop shadow, right? We should drop shadow, right? So we can simply make this bigger after dropping our shadow. Okay. Now, the next thing I want us to do is let's click on this and let's go over to shape. Now, these rounded corners, I want us to make it 5. Okay, or let me just say I want it more rounded, then I can say I want this to be 11, right? Now this is looking much better to me. Now let me go over here to see, okay, I feel like this one is quite wider than this. So I want to make this a bit wider to see what actually happens. Now I want to also go over to say, let me look at the shadow I dropped, okay? Let me look at the shadow I dropped, and let me say I want to reduce it to 66, right? Now this is looking much better to me. Okay, so don't forget that we can actually go ahead to tweak this if we feel like it is not actually matching. And additionally, you need to know that it need not be exactly the same with what we actually have there. Okay, we can actually decide to. It need not be the same with what we actually have there. So there could be a little differences, and that is not actually a big deal. The most important thing is that you understand how to build a functional dashboard, right? Now, the next thing we need to achieve is, of course, when you look here, you see that we have this image right here. Okay, we have this image right here. So we just have to go over and let me say I would like to make this 6, right? So we just have to go over and let's say adjust this image a bit. And when adjusting your image, you actually hold down the shift key, right? Now, okay, we can simply say Control Z, right? So we can simply right click on this, okay? Or let's go over to say format visual, okay? Then we say we want to bring this particular visual to front, all right? Then we can just leave it right here. Okay, now the next thing we have to do is we need to go ahead and achieve the name, which says Precious Benjamin Marketing Analyst, right? Now to do that, we go ahead to say insert. Then what are we inserting? We are inserting the text, right? Now we can simply go ahead to make this smaller. Then the next thing we have to do is I can say I want to make this longer, okay? Because the name is a bit long, so I can call this Precious Benjamin, right? I can call this Precious Benjamin. Now I can simply highlight this and say I want this to be Canva. If you have been following most of my tutorial, you will see that I actually like working with this font. Okay. Now the next thing I can do is when you look at this, you see that we actually have a background just below the text, a white background. So we just have to go over and turn off that background. Then we can simply go over to make this a bit smaller. Okay, so the line or the box, the text box doesn't look too big. Okay, then we can simply leave it here. Now, the next thing we can do is we can simply copy and paste it. Then we can move this over here and let's say this is marketing analyst, right? Now, the next thing we can do is I want us to make this a bit bigger, maybe highlight this and make it 12, right? So the name stands out. Then the next thing I want to do is I want us to leave this at 11, okay? So this actually stands out and says marketing analyst. Then we can simply highlight those three. Then we can simply go over to align, okay? Then we can say align to center. Then we can say okay. Now, the next thing I want us to do is probably, let me see if I can make this bold, okay? So if I am making this bold, I actually have to move it here a bit, okay? So I think that makes sense. But if I'm making this bold, I want to reduce it to 11, the font size to 11, right? So it looks better that way. Then I might decide to reduce this. So let me highlight this and say, let me take this to 10.5, okay? Okay, I feel like it is looking better this way. We can always adjust things later. Then we can highlight this, go over to format and say, I want to align this to center, right? I want to align this to center. So even though this looks like it is falling around the place, so I can simply say, I want to reduce the space between these. Then I want to highlight this tray and I want to align them to center again. Now I feel like that is looking much better. Now the next thing we want to achieve is, of course, we need to achieve this dashboard here. So now to do that, we just have to go over to this and we have to go over to say, I want to insert. Now what am I trying to insert? I'm inserting a shape, right? Now what I have to do is I actually have to move this here, right? Then I can simply make this smaller. Okay, then make this a bit bigger, right? Then move this here a bit and take this down a bit, right? Now the next thing I have to do is I have to format the shape. Okay, now I can format it to be exactly like the background color right here. Then I want to also remove the border. Okay, so I can decide to remove the border. Now this is making sense. And when you look at this, you find out that the color of this and this isn't matching, right? So I want this to match with this exactly. So what I have to do is I just have to click on this and let me go to canvas information or let me go to wallpaper. Okay, when you go to wallpaper, this is actually the color of our dashboard, the background of our dashboard, right? Now what we have to do is click on this, we go over to shape, then we simply say more color, then we'll paste it here, then we'll say okay, right? Now this is what I have been trying to achieve. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to go over to increase this rounded and say I want to make it maybe I want to make it 7, right? Now the next thing I want to do is let me look at what we have here. Okay, I said I want to make that 7, right? So I can decide to make this bold, right? Then I can also decide to make this round. Okay, I want to make it round, more round, more round. So let me leave it at 22. Now this is making sense to me. So I can also decide to make this bigger, right? 22 bigger. Okay. Now the next thing I can decide to do is I can decide to switch this color and let me leave it at this. Okay. Now the next thing I would want to do is I can decide to look at what I have here. Okay. So I can decide to move this over here. Right. Okay. Now the next thing is okay, I can decide to say Control Z, then move this over here and say I want to format this and I want this to come to the front, right? Then I can then move this, okay? I am actually making it smaller. So I can then move this over here, right? Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to paste, okay? I want to copy this, right? I want to copy this and I want to paste it. Okay, I said I want to copy this. So I click here, I say Ctrl Z and Ctrl V, then I can move it right here, right? Now the next thing I want to do is I simply want to call this dashboard. Dashboard. Okay. Now I can simply make this smaller and let me move this here. Okay, so it says dashboard, right? Now, the next thing I can do is I can decide to highlight this and make it 12, right? So it's very bold, right? And visible. Okay. Now I can decide to click on this tray and let me say I want to give space between those two so this can actually break, right? Now the next thing I can do is I can start filling in these icons appropriately. So I can actually decide to move this right here. Okay, then okay, so I have to say Control Z. So I have to move this over here and I have to say I want to bring this to the front. Then I can move this over here, right? I can move this over here so I can make this bigger. I can make this longer. Okay, so that's making perfect sense. Now the next thing I can do is let me look at the next icon, customer. So I can simply pick this and say I want to move this over here. I can simply say I want this to come to the front, right? Now the next icon is our product icon, okay? Product icon. So I can simply, of course, move this here and I say I want this to come to the front, right? I want this to come to the front, okay? Now the next thing I can do is I can look at the next icon and that will be our support icon. And I can move this over here and say I want this to come to the front, of course, so it can be visible. Then I can move it right here, right? Now the next thing I can do is I want the setting because I believe that's what comes next. So I want this to come to the front, okay? So I can leave it right there. Now I can simply click on this, sorry, I can simply click on all these icons, okay? I can simply go over to formats, then I can simply say align, and I want to align them center, okay? And I also wish to align them, distribute them, okay, no? I wish to distribute them, I wish to distribute them vertically, right? Now this makes sense to me, okay? Now the next thing I want to do is I want to make this image a bit smaller, okay, and move it up a bit. Then I also want to move this up a bit, okay? So I would also want to move this up a bit, right? Move this up a bit, right? Now this makes sense, okay? This makes sense to me, all right? Now the next thing is I can simply move this here, right? I can simply move this here and take this a bit up, okay? Now that's just making sense, right? Then the next thing we can do is we can simply pick all these icons, then let's take them up a bit. So let's take this up a bit, okay? Now, why do I feel like this is looking too broad? So I can simply make it look a bit smaller, right? Then I can simply move this text here to the middle, of course. Now that is looking a bit better to me, right? A bit, just a bit better. Then I can simply decide to move this here and also move this up a bit. All right. Now I can simply decide to also pick this tray or this five icons, and I can say I want to also take this up a bit and move them just by the side, okay, and just right here, right? Now, the next thing I can decide to do is I can simply, of course, take this here, okay, which is, okay, I can simply say Control Z. I want this to be here, but I want it to be visible. So I go over to say format and I go over to say bring to front, okay. I think that makes sense, right? Now let's go ahead to see what we are doing. Okay, that makes sense. Now, the next thing I want to do, of course, is I want to copy this and paste it. Then I want to move it over here. So I can go over to say, sorry, I go over to say control. Okay, I can go over to copy this, okay, and control V, control V, control V it over and over again. So I can just simply adjust this appropriately. Okay, I can simply adjust this appropriately, right? Now for this, I can come over to say I'm calling this analytics, right? I'm calling this analytics, okay? Then I can decide to make this smaller, then just move this right here, right? Now, when you look at the size of the icon, I feel like it's a bit bigger. So I can simply decide to highlight this and make this 12 so they are more visible, right? Now, the next thing I can decide to do is I can simply decide to click on this tool and let me go over to format align and say I want them to be at the middle of each other, right? Now, the next thing I can do is I can also pick this up and I call this customers. Or let me just say customer, then I highlight and also make 12, right? Now, the next thing I can do is I can simply move this right here, okay? And I can simply highlight this tool and say I want this to actually be middle. Okay. Now the next thing I can do is I can simply take this over and let me say this is highlight this and call this products, right? Then I can highlight this and say I want this to be 12, right? Then I can simply make this smaller. Okay, then I can move it over here, right? I can move it over here, then I can highlight this and say I want this to also middle. Now the next thing I can do is I can click on this and this supports. I can highlight this and say support, right? Then I can highlight and say this should be 12. Okay. Then I can also click on this, right, and make this smaller a bit. Then let me make it more smaller. So I can go to this click on this, then I can simply say I want, no, that's not what I'm trying to do. Now I can simply go over to here, right? So I have to remove this. Then I can simply go over to here and say align. Then I want to align to middle, right? Now the next thing I want to do is I want to click on this and let me say call this settings, right? Settings. Then I want to highlight this and make it 12, right? Then I wish to make this smaller. Then I move this over here, right? Just over here and click on these two. And I say, what do I want to do? I want to go over to format, go over to align and say middle, right? Now, the next thing, of course, I want to do is go over here, highlight this and say log out. Okay, then I want to highlight this, then make this 12 and make this smaller. Then go over here and say highlight this two, go over to format, go over to align and say middle. Now this makes sense, right? Now the next thing we have to achieve is let's go over and achieve the structure. I told you we are trying to achieve the entire structure of the dashboard, right? So the next thing I want us to go over to achieve is this right here, right? Now to do that, we just simply have to go over to say insert. Then we go over to say shape. Now what are we trying to do? We go over to this, so we can decide to make this longer, then we can decide to make this smaller, right? Or we can decide to make this longer, right? And then we can simply decide to go over to format and we say, I want to send this back. Okay, I want to send this back. So click on send back. Okay, now this goes back, right? Now this is what I am actually trying to achieve, taking this back. But when I look at this, I think that I can simply make this smaller, right? I can simply make this smaller. Okay, then over here I can come over to say I want this to be white. Okay, then over here we can say we don't want the border showing. Then we can say I want to drop shadow. Okay, then because of I'm loving shadow, I can simply make this a bit longer, right? A bit longer. Then we can make this a bit longer. Okay. Now that makes sense, right? Then I can simply move this up a bit, right? Now that makes sense. Okay. Now the next thing I need to achieve is I need to achieve the business performance dashboard, right? Now to do that, I can simply go ahead to click on this, right? Then copy and paste it. Okay. So I want to click on this and paste it. Then I want to move this here a bit. Then I want to say, what did we call that place? So we call that business performance dashboard. So we can say business performance dashboard, business performance dashboard. Okay, business performance dashboard. Then I can simply highlight this and I want to make this 24, right? So I can simply make this bigger and wider. Right now, this is making sense. But when I look at this, I simply feel like this is actually looking too bold. Okay, so I can simply highlight this and I'm onboarding this, right? Then the next thing I want to do is I want to leave it at 20, okay, and see what happens. Then I want to move it over here. So this says business performance dashboard, right? I'm moving it over here. Now, the next thing I want to do is I would want to achieve, okay, I think that's all for now. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is I want us to achieve the other functionalities, okay, like the other structure, right? So I want us to achieve this white structures just over here. Now to do that, what we have to do is we go over to say I want to insert a shape, right? Or instead of saying I want to insert a shape, I want to go over here and copy this and paste this, right? Then I can move this over here. So I can simply, sorry, forgive me for that. So I can simply click on this and decide to make it smaller, then decide to make this bigger and bigger. Okay. So this can actually stay right here, right? So this can actually stay right here, right? Now let's go over to see what we are actually working on. Okay, so this is actually looking quite smaller, right? Quite smaller, quite smaller, quite smaller, quite smaller, quite smaller. Okay, now I feel like this is making much sense. Okay, this is making much sense. Now the next thing is I don't really know if I have a shadow right there, but I from what I'm looking, I don't think I actually do have a shadow. Okay, so I will just leave that at that for now, right? Now the next thing I want to give a breathing space right here. Okay, a breathing space right here. Now the next thing is I'll copy and paste this. Then I can come over here, right? Let me see what I have right there. Okay, so I can make this come here a bit. Then I can make this smaller, right? Make this smaller. So let's just see. Then okay, we have three over here, so that should be able to contain three, right? So make this color just like this. Then I can copy and paste this. Then this should be right here. Okay, so we should have one that should be able to go in here. So let's go over here to see what's happening. Does it mean that this is too wide? Okay, now let's take it up a bit, right? Or let's yeah, this is looking better. Okay, then we can move this up a bit. Now let me look at the space between them. Okay, I think we have sufficient space between them right here, right? Now let me paste this again and see if one can actually contain here. So that's not possible. And I think we're missing out something because this should be able to enter three of them. Now let's see what we can do if we can make this smaller, right? And let me try moving this up a bit. Okay. So I'll try moving this right here. Okay. Then I can try moving this up. Okay, I can try moving this up. Then I can try moving this up now, right? Then I can try moving this up now. Okay, I can try moving this up now, right? Okay, then let me see what is going on there. Right, I think that of the same shape. And I can try moving this right here. Okay, now, okay, I want to know what is making this look too tight, right? Now, I think this is looking perfect, right? This is just looking a bit too wide. Now, let's confirm that. Okay, that was looking a bit the same to me too, right? But I think we can just leave it that way, right? Like I mentioned, it doesn't really need to be perfect, okay, or exactly the same thing that I actually have there. The most important thing is that you're understanding how to actually work around this. Okay, so that's the most important thing right here. Now we have successfully achieved that. Now the next thing we have to look at is how to achieve this, right? This is what we are looking at. Now to do that, what we have to do is we just simply have to say Control V, then we go over to this, right? Now let's look at what we are trying to achieve. Okay, so we are trying to achieve this big over here, right? So let's look at that. So yes, we're trying to achieve that over there. So achieve that over there. So the next thing we can simply copy and paste this, and this is what we are trying to achieve. So this is also not bad, right? So this is also not bad. So yes, this is looking like it, right? Now let's go over here and check that. So this is looking a bit wider, right? It's looking quite bigger than what we have here. Sorry, it's looking quite bigger than what we have here. Okay, this is looking a bit too small or congested. Now let's look at if we can actually make this a bit smaller, right? And see what happens. So we can move this here a bit, right? So we can simply move this here a bit. Okay, we can simply move this here a bit. Then we can simply move this here a bit. Okay, so this should be able to enter right here, right? Should be able to enter right here. Then we can simply move this over here a bit. Then we can simply move this over here a bit. Over here a bit. Okay, then we can simply move this over here a bit. Okay, I think that is now looking too congested, right? So we can simply move this, right? Then move this, okay? So there can be spaces between them. Then we can simply go ahead to make this a bit bigger, right? Then we can simply make this to match this. Then we can simply make this to match this. Now we can simply go ahead to copy and paste this. Then we can simply go ahead to say we want to make this smaller, right? Want to make this smaller. So we can simply make this smaller. Okay. So we can simply make this smaller, right? So this is it. Now, the next thing we can simply do is we can simply go ahead to add the shadows. Okay, so we can simply add a shadow. Then we can simply add a shadow. Then over here, do we have a shadow over there? Let's confirm that. Okay, it's looking like we did actually. So we can simply add this. So we can now move this out a bit. And we can now move this out a bit. Then we can now move this out a bit. So everything makes more sense this way. So for this we can simply push it over here a bit, so there'll be space, enough space, so we can push it over here a bit, right? So for this we can just move it over there a bit. Now this makes sense, right? Now we can go ahead to start building our actual dashboard, right? But let's just see, because there's something I'm noticing, the space between this and this. Okay, I think the space between this and this is looking too much, so I can just make it smaller, right? So I can just draw this down a bit and make it smaller too. Okay. So as for this can simply come down a bit, right? This can simply come down a bit. Now this is looking better. Then we can go ahead to start building our actual dashboard, right? Now to do that, what we have to do is let's go over to this, right? The first thing we have to do is I want us to visualize our this we have our sales growth percentage, right? And country, okay? The sales growth percentage by country, right? So that's the first thing we need to visualize. To achieve that, what we have to do is we go over to insert and we say we are trying to insert a new visual, right? Then let's move this over here. So let's go over to visual to see we are making use of a clustered column chart, right? We're making use of a clustered column chart. Then we can go over to our financials, right? So we are actually trying to see our countries. So we move our country to our x-axis, right? Then we are trying to look for our sales growth percentage, right? So this is our sales growth percentage. Then we can move it to our y-axis, right? Now this is actually what we are trying to achieve. Okay. Now when you look at here, you see that we actually have a blank we have a bar chart, sorry, that is actually blank, right? Now I want us to go ahead and fix that. Now how do we fix that? I want us to go over to our dim location. So I want us to go over to our edit query. So I want us to go over to our edit query. So we wait for that to open up, right? Now, when you look at this, right, you see that the blank bar chart we are having is this, which is the United States of America. Now, when you look at this, it says the United States of America of America. So Power BI is not actually recognizing it. Okay. So what we have to do is we simply go over to say, let's go over to say replace values, right? We go over to say replace values, right? So, but before then, I want us to cancel this. I want us to copy this first, okay? Then let's then right click and go over to replace values. Then we can input this. And what are we replacing it to? We are replacing it to United States of America, all right? United States of America. So we can say okay, right? Then we can now close and apply. Okay, so let's close and apply. Okay, so we have successfully closed and applied. So we can say apply changes. So we wait for the changes to be applied. Okay, so we can say, so we see if that updates automatically. So as you can see, that now says United States of America. Now let's see what we actually have here. Okay, so you see that says United States of America, right? Now let's go back. Now we can simply go ahead to start making this suit our visual. Okay, so we can simply make this bigger before we go ahead to start formatting it. So we can simply make this bigger, then make this bigger. Okay. Now we can go over to start formatting it. Now let's look at what we did right here. Right. Now the first thing we can actually do is I want us to go over to say let's go over to format visuals, right? Let's turn off the y axis and see. No, that's not what I'm trying to do. Let's turn off the x axis. No, that's not what I'm trying to achieve. Right? Now, what I'm trying to achieve is let's go over to general. Okay, the title. I want us to turn off the title. Right? So that's one thing I'm trying to achieve. So I also want us to turn off the header icon. Now, the next thing I want us to achieve is I want us to go over to x-axis, right? I want everything to be Canva, okay? So Canva, so I go over to look at Canva, okay? Then I want everything to be Canva 8, right? Now, let's make that. Now, the same thing for y-axis, right? I want everything to be Canva 8. So we go over to say Canva and I say 8, okay? Canva 8. Now that makes sense, right? Now the next thing we can do is I want us to go over to say I want us to turn off background. Now let's turn off the background to see what happens, right? So let me see. Do we have let's go to properties, right? Then title. Then let's go to effects. Then let's turn off background, right? To see that. Now the next thing I want us to do is I want us to go over to let's look at what we have here. So we go over to make France the green. Okay, so let's go over to say visual. Then we go over to our bars. Okay, then we can say France should be let's go over to more colors. So let's say France should be okay, sorry. So let's go over to say show all, right? Show all. Then let's say I want um France to be light green. Okay, light green, or let's make the green a bit bright, right? So let's make the green a bit bright. Then this, I want the rest of them to be black, right? The rest of them should be black. Then this should also be black. Then this should be a touch of red. Okay, so this isn't giving me the red vibe, so I want it to be red, right? Let me take it here, touch of red. Okay, now that is actually making sense, right? That is actually making sense. Okay, so for the green, I can say, let me see the green here. So for the green, I can say let it be a bit light. Okay, for the green, I can say let it be a bit light, but I think that green over there is just too light for what I want to achieve. Okay, so I can take it this way, then take it this way, take it down a little. Okay, I think that makes sense, right? Now, for this, I can simply come over to insert and let me say, what am I inserting? I'm inserting a text box, right? Then for this, I can say, what is this called? I can say sales growth percentage by country. So sales growth percentage by country, right? Then this one, I said France tops the bar. So France tops the bar. Okay, so we can highlight this and let's make this camber, right? So we can make this camber and make this 12. Okay, now that makes sense. Okay, I make this camber and make this 12. So we can now make this smaller, right? Then we can go over to say, in fact, I want to turn off background. Then I want to move this here, right? I want to move this right here, okay, to see how that works. So for this, I can simply say I want to move this down a bit, okay. So let's see how that works. Okay, so for this, I can simply say I want to take it up a bit. So just up a bit. So I want to take it up a bit, okay. Oh, okay, I can simply say I want to make this up a bit, right? Okay, so okay, I think this is, or maybe I can say I want to make this 11. Okay, so I can simply also say I want to move this here a bit, right? Move it here a bit. Now that is looking better. So for this, I can simply say let me make it smaller. So that is looking better if you ask me, right? So yes, so this is it. So that's looking better, right? Now the next thing we have to achieve is, of course, the next thing we have to achieve is we actually have to achieve this here. Right, when you look at this, you see that this is a scatter plot, okay, that shows profit margin by total sales. Okay, so let's see how to do that. So to do that, we go over to say insert. So what are we inserting? We are inserting a new visual. So where is our new visual? So we say insert. What are we inserting? A new visual, right? So we go over to our visual. What are we inserting? Second page. Is this what we're inserting? No. So okay. Let me just use this, right? Then I can move this over here. Okay. I can move this over here, right? So I can just say Control Z that, Control Z that, right? Then I can move this over here. So what are we trying to visualize? We are looking at sales growth percentage, right? Profit percentage by total sales, right? So remember I told you I've already calculated everything. Okay, so this is the profit margin percentage, right? This is the profit margin percentage. So all I have to do is I just have to move it to my x-axis, right? Then the next thing is our total sales, right? Is that what we're trying to visualize? Let's confirm. Sales profit margin by total sales. Okay, yes, sales profit margin by total sales. Then we can, so this is the total sales, right? So we can simply move the total sales to the y-axis, okay, to the y-axis. Then for the size, we can simply move the total sales to the size, okay. So for here, we can simply say legend. Let's make legend segments, okay. Now that makes sense, okay. So we can simply make this a bit bigger to suit what we are actually looking for, right? Now, of course, the next thing we have to do is let's look at this first, right? So the next thing we have to do is, okay, let's go back. So let's go ahead to start formatting, right? Now, the next thing we have to do is we can simply go over to say formats, okay? So for this, I want to make this, of course, I want to make this Canva, right? Remember, I told you we are leaving everything as Canva 8, okay? Then um for that, that's for the x-axis, right? Then for the values, let's okay, Canva 8 range. Okay, for the y-axis, let's also do the same thing as Canva 8. So Canva 8. Okay. Then we have our Canva 8, right? For this. Now the next thing we have to do is let's go back to the title. Okay. So for the title, are we turning off the title or okay, let me just make the title Canva, right? And I want to make it Canva. I want to make it Canva 8, right? Canva 8. But I think this is not giving me Canva 8. I think I'm making the wrong Canva 8. So what I want to do is, yeah, this is what I'm trying to look at. So this is what I want to make Canva 8. I want to make it Canva, okay, let's make it Canva 11, right? So that is not looking bad, right? So we can just leave it as Canva 11. As for the colors, we can decide to trick it around, but I want to leave it at this for now. Okay, I want to leave it at this for now. So I want us to go over to the visual again, right? I want us to go over to the visual again. And I want us to look at the y-axis, right? Let's look at the values of the y-axis. Okay. Then I also want us to go to the x-axis. Let's look at the values. Okay. Now I think that's looking okay for to me. Now let's say the next thing we need to achieve. Now the next thing we need to achieve, let's go over and achieve our sales by products. Okay. Now to do that, let's go over to this and let's go over to say insert a new visual, right? Then what we have to do is go over to this, right? Now this is the visual we're using, all right? The clustered bar charts. Okay. Now what are we trying to visualize? We are actually trying to see the sales by products. Okay. So now to do that, let's go over to say move total sales here, right? Okay, move total sales here. Sorry, let's go over to say here's our products. So let's go over to say we're moving our products here, right? Then we can say we are moving total sales here. Okay. Then I think that's what we are trying to achieve. Then we can simply say we are making this a bit bold, right? A bit bold. But for this, let me see if I can move this here a bit, right? I'll move this here a bit. Okay. So sorry. So let's just say we're making this a bit bold, right? Then okay, let's go ahead to see what we have there. Okay, sorry. So let's go ahead and see what we have there. So VCT, okay. Now let's go over to this, right? Let's go over to this. Now we need to start formatting that. So firstly, let's start by our bars, okay? So we say show all, right? So this VTT should be this, and Montana should be that, okay? Then the other bar should be black, right? Should leave them as black, okay? Should leave them as black. Okay. Now this is making sense. Then we can go back to general and turn off title, right? Then we can go over to visual and let's look at let's turn this to Canva 8. So we can say Canva 8. Okay. Then the next thing we can do is of course we go over to our y axis. Then we also say we want to make this Canva. Okay, Canva 8 also Canva 8. Now that's making sense to me. Okay, so let's see what we can do. See what we can do. So for this, we can simply come over here and let's copy and paste this. Then we can move this over here, right? Now we'll move this over here. We can come over here and say sales by product BTT leads, sales, okay? Yeah, say sales by product BTT leads, BTT leads, okay? So we can simply come here and let's move this here a bit, right? Now this is making sense to me. Okay, so I feel like I want to make this a bit bigger. Maybe let me make it 12. Okay, should I make this bold though? I want to make this bold and see what happens. Okay, so I think this is looking better, right? It's looking much better. Now the next thing we have to achieve is this, right? Our path charts over here. Okay. Now we are looking at the top three segments by discounts. Okay. Now to achieve that, what we have to do is, of course, we go over to insert and we say new visual, right? Now, what are we using? We are using a pie chart. So we go over to say a pie chart. Okay. We are trying to look at, so what are we trying to achieve? We are trying to look at segments by visual, by discount, average discount. Now, to do that, we have to go over to segments. Okay. So we drag segments to our legend, right? Then we go over to values and drag our average discount. Okay, average discounts to values. Okay, now this is it. Now, when you actually look at this, you find out that we are just looking at three segments, which is the top three segments, which is the small business, enterprise, and small business, enterprise, and government. So let's go ahead to see how we can achieve that using filters. Okay. Now to do that, we go over to our filter right here. Okay. So we go over to click on this, right? And we go over to say, okay, let's leave this out for it, right? Then let's go over to say this, okay? Now we are splitting by top n, okay? So we say top three, okay? So we say top three, okay? Then, okay, so we say top three, right? So we say add by value, okay? So we can let's look for our average discounts. Okay, so we drag our average discounts here. So we can say apply. Okay. Now that gives us what we are looking at. Okay. Now we can simply go ahead to for here I want us to turn off the background for this particular visual. Right? So we go over to general and we say properties. Okay, no, let's go back to effects, right? Then we say turn off the background, right? Then over here too, I want us to turn off the background. Then I want us to go over to turn off the title as well. Then I want us to go over to visual and I want us to say what do I want us to say? Legend. Okay, I think we should leave the legend right there. So slices, the colors. Now let's look at what we have here. Okay, so we have green and red and black. Okay, now let's go over to say we want this to be green, then we want this to be red, then we want this to be black. Now that makes sense, right? Now, the next thing we have to do is we can simply decide to make this a bit bigger, right? Then make this wider over here. Okay, so we can simply move this up a bit. Okay, then for this, we can simply come over here, copy this and paste it. Copy and paste this, and we can move this. Sorry, we can say Ctrl Z, right? So for this, sorry. So for this, we can simply move this. Okay, no, no, no. So we can simply say Ctrl Z again. Sorry, this is not working. Okay, so for this, I want to highlight this particular one. Alright. Okay, so this is what I really want to highlight, and I want to move this. I want to move it right here. Okay, so let's go over to this. So for this, we can simply say top three segment by discount, amount, small business segment list. Okay, top three segments by average discounts, by average discounts, by average discounts. Okay, then we say business, small business segment leads, small business segment leads, right? So we can highlight this. I want to make this 11, right? I want to make this smaller. So we can actually make this way, and I can move this here, right? Now that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Now we can simply go over here. So for this, right? For this, we can simply leave it here or just go ahead and make everything green, right? But I'll simply want us to leave it here because of the legend, right? So for this, we can simply go over to start working on this. Now the first thing we have to achieve here is this, right? Which is the split of sales by Germany and France. Okay. Now let's go over to do that. Now let's go ahead to do that. So to do that, let's go ahead to this, right? Now we just have to go ahead to say new visual. Okay. Now, the new visual we're going to be using is, let's go back to this. I think for that particular visual, we make use of a donut chart, okay? A donut chart, right? Now, we have actually calculated, we have actually calculated our fan cell, okay? Our fan cells and our Gemini cells. So what we have to do is we drag them into values, right? Fan cells, Gemini cells. So we drag them into values, okay? The next thing we have to do is we simply copy this and paste this, right? Then we can simply drag this here, right? Now the next thing we have to do is now the first thing we have to do is we are looking at let's look at France, okay? So let's go over here and see that. So okay, we are looking at Germany, right? Germany, right? Now let's go ahead and see that again. So Germany is what we are looking at. So Germany. Yes. So what we have to do is we go back to this, okay? So we go back to our slices, okay? So for Germany, we turn it to black, right? We turn Germany to black. And for France, we simply gray it out, okay? We simply gray it out, right? Now, the next thing we have to do is I want us to go over to our sizes again. So let's look at the spaces. So let's make this I want us to make this tiny, very, very tiny. Okay. Now let's look at what it looks like there. Right. Very, very tiny. I think it's still make it more tiny. Okay. Now I think that makes more sense. Then we have to go over to let's go over to this. Right? Okay, we have to go over to let's turn off our this, turn off our header icon. Then the next thing we have to do is let's go over to this, let's turn off our detail label. Detail label. Okay. So yes, we turned off our detail label. So let's turn off our legend. So okay. Then let's go to general, let's go to effects, let's turn off our background. Right? Now we can simply hold our shift key and make this smaller. Okay, or we can even simply make it a bit bigger. Okay? We can simply make it a bit bigger, right? We can copy and then we can paste this, then we can move it here a bit. Okay? Now let's look at how that is looking. Okay, so I want to go over here and I want to remove this, right? So for this, I want to make it a bit bigger. Okay, then I want to move it right here, please. Okay, then I want to copy and paste this. So I want to move this right here a bit. Okay, now that's making much sense to me, right? Now for this, I want to go over here and for this, I want to go over to say this in the slices. I would say gray out Germany. Okay, I would say gray out Germany and make France black. Now this makes sense to me. Now the next thing I can do is I can simply pick up my text box. Okay, I can simply copy this and paste this here, right? I can copy and paste. Okay, I'm trying to copy the text box, not the visual, right? So why don't I simply copy this as it, copy and paste this, okay? Then I can simply now move this over here, right? And let's see what we are trying to achieve there. So we are simply trying to say Germany 12.8 million, right? So we say Germany, right? Germany. So that should be capital. Germany, okay? So we can simply highlight this and say we want to make the color, want to make the color, want to make the color this, right? So we can simply say we want it to be at the middle, okay? So we can simply make this smaller, then we can simply move this here, to say Germany. Then I can simply copy this or we can simply paste it. So copy and paste this, right? So we can come over here to say, let's call this funds. Okay, let's call this funds, right? Then the next thing we can simply do is, sorry, okay, let's call that funds. Okay, so we can move this up a bit. Now I see that is France, right? So let's say France. Okay. So for Germany, we can also move it up just a bit, right? Then we can simply go over to say paste, right? So we are saying Germany is 3.8 million, right? Germany is 3.8 million. Okay. And let's see what happens there, 12.8 million. Okay. So this, I think Germany has to be black, not that color black, right? The same thing with France. France needs to be black. Okay. France needs to be black also, right? So we can simply say this is 12.8, so we can copy and paste it. So we can move this here to say 12.8, right? 12.8. So why we say this is 10.56 m, okay? So we can simply then make this smaller, right? So we can simply make this smaller, right? Let's then move this here, right here, right? So for this, we can also make it smaller, okay? Can make it smaller. Now let's move this right here, okay? Now that is coming along. That is coming along. So we can simply also say Ctrl V, okay? We can simply also say Ctrl V. Then we can simply say 54.8%, right? 54.8%. Then we can make this smaller. Maybe make this 11, right? Or make this 10.5. Make this 10.5. Then we can simply make this smaller. Okay? So I want us to go over to this, right? So we can simply make this 10.5. And I think I want to make it green. So this shows that this is the highest, right? It shows that that is the highest. Okay, so we can simply move Germany up here, please. So we can simply move Germany up here, please. So we can also simply move this up here, please. Right? Then why that stays there. Okay. Now we can also do the same for this. We can simply move this up here a bit. Then also move this up here a bit. And we can simply copy and paste this. Right? So we can simply I want to copy and paste this. So I can simply move this here. Right? I can simply move this here. And I can simply call this sorry, so this is 42 points, 42 points, 45.2, right? 45, 45.2, 45.2%. Then I can also, okay, this is 10.5, so I can just highlight something this way. So it shows that this is lower. Okay. So let's see what happens. Now I think this is actually looking good. Right? So we can simply go this sorry, so just give me a moment. Right? So just give me a moment. So I can simply make this wider. Okay. And this too I can decide to make it wider. Right? I can decide to make this wider too. Okay. Now, I think that is making much sense. Even this, I can decide to make it wider. Okay. So for this, we can start to make sure it's at the middle. Okay. The same thing with this, right? Same thing with this. We can decide to make sure it's at the middle. Okay. Then the next thing, okay, this should be at the middle, right? Okay. I want this to go up a bit, just a bit. I can decide to take this up a bit. Okay. So yes. So let me just take this up a bit. Okay, now that makes sense. Okay, so I can now decide to simply click on this, 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 click on that. Then I can decide to right click and say group. Group. Okay, so I can also decide to do the same for this. Click on this, click on this, click on that, click on this, and I can decide to say group. Okay. Then I can decide to move this here. Then I can decide to, sorry, move this here, right? Maybe take them down a bit. Then for this, I can decide to take this down a bit and move it here a bit. Then this one can simply come here a bit, right? Can simply come here a bit. Okay. Now that is looking good to me, right? Now the next thing I can do is I can just decide to remove this. I can decide to remove this. Okay. Then I can decide to pick this again. And okay, no, I don't want to pick this. Let me pick this instead. So Control Z and Control V. Control Z and Control V. And I can decide to move this over here. Now let's go over here to see. So we can call this Germany versus France sales splits. Okay? So we can decide to highlight this and then make this full, right? So I can decide to make this smaller and I can also decide to move this over here.
The next thing we have to achieve is this card here, alright, this major card right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. To do that, the first thing we have to do is we have to go over to say insert and we say add a new visual, right? Now we go over to say okay, add our start our quarter bar charts, right? Then let's go over to our dates, okay? Let's go over to our date and we go over to drag our month name to our x axis. Then we go over to drag our what are we working on? So total sales. Then we go over to drag our total sales to our y axis. Okay. Now that gives us what we have right there. We can go ahead to start formatting this. Okay. So the first thing we have to do, of course, is we go ahead to format. Then we turn off the y x axis and we turn off the y axis. Okay. Then we go over to title. We turn off title. Then we go over to effects. Okay. We turn off background. Then we go over to head icon. We turn that off. Then properties, let's go over to visual, right? Now let's go over to title. Let's turn this off, right? Then let's go to our x-axis, then we turn off title. Okay. Then let's go over to general. So let's go over to visual. Then let's go over to our bar charts. Let's make this all black. Then we go can go back to resize this, alright, to